Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Debra and Peter doing a podcast with me, Debra Allcock Tyler, and my lovely twinny, Peter Wanless. How are you, Peter?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you, Debra. I'm just back from a very, very large lunch with Wanless Junior. We had some special tokens to save us some money, and one of them was a special deal for the over 60s, which, as you know, I just about qualify for. So we went there, and I was the second youngest there, and Junior was the youngest by a considerable period of years. And what a boom in trade there was going on, though. I mean, fantastic value for money offer, which had clearly been spotted by the over 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s within about a kind of 20-mile radius of where we are. So we squeezed ourselves into this packed place, and I'm now feeling a little bit heavy of the stomach. I don't think I'll be having any dinner tonight.
Well, my mother always says to me, when you go on holiday, darling, she says, always look where the pensioners go. She said, because you can guarantee that the restaurants that are packed full of pensioners, it's probably pretty decent food and at a really good price. You know, don't go where the young people go, because the food will be rubbish and it'll be really expensive and overpriced. Look for the pensioners, she says. Of course, you know, that will be us one of these days pretty soon. So, because being over 60, of course, doesn't, I mean, I'm not a pensioner yet. I don't get my pension. Well, we don't get our state pensions till we're 67, Peter, so...
Well, Junior absolutely loved it because it was all you can eat roast. It was all you can drink Coke. He said he loved the vibe of the place. It reminded him of cricket committee. So there we are. Yeah,
so
what's not to like? He often tells me he feels he was born into the wrong generation.
2 full Wanlesses, Peter. Something to be desired. So listen, what's been on my mind this week is this leaking of the plan, the American plan to bomb the Houthis, I think it was, isn't it? And I saw the chap at the Atlantic, the editor-in-chief at the Atlantic, talking through the detail that had been shared in this thing, because the US government or various people are denying that there was any detail in there, but he was basically saying that he read literally minute-by-minute breakdown of what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, who was going to be bombing, what the equipment was they were going to be using, etc., etc., etc. And he said he read that about 2 hours before the thing actually happened. So and of course, I don't know if you or listeners have heard about this, but what happened was there was I don't know if it was WhatsApp or messaging, but anyway, there was a group, and a journalist was accidentally included in this group where they were discussing, very senior officials were sharing this information. And so, of course, it's all got out, and I don't know what's going to happen now. But it did raise some big alarm bells for me, because, of course, we look at that in horror and we think, oh, you know, who would be so stupid? But actually, I have to say that I've been hearing recently of lots of trustees enthusiastically adopting things like Signal or WhatsApp or Teams messaging to share information about stuff. And I'm getting to the stage now of having to warn them not to do it, because it seems great, doesn't it? You communicate more, it's easier, it's more fluid. But the problem is that people don't associate those groups like WhatsApp, like Signal, whatever, with formal work stuff. So they tend to not be as careful about the things that they say. And I recently heard of a charity where a trustee in a WhatsApp group had said something rather scathing about a senior member of staff who was about to lose their job. And of course, this person is now fighting about this losing their job. And this WhatsApp group is now likely to be subject to a subject access request, because, of course, it's not protected in law. So I'm saying to trustees at the moment, please do not conduct official business via social media channels, because you are bound to get yourself tripped up, or you'll end up having to chuck your mobile phone over the North Sea like Rebecca Vardy did. So you need to be super careful about these things. You know, I always say to people mock email because they say it's old-fashioned, but the thing about it is that you tend to be more formal, and you tend to be much more conscious that people are watching and listening and might have access to it than you do on informal social media chat. So I don't know what you think about that. Yeah. That's great because it makes for better, more fluid relationships, but the risk is so great of saying something entirely inappropriate that gets you and your charity into terrible trouble.
There's some real dangers, aren't there? And it's also no defense to protect yourself if you receive something and don't report it. So if you receive a child abuse image or something that is defamatory to another person and you don't take active action at that moment, you can be prosecuted. And there was a senior person in the police, wasn't there, a senior female police officer, I think, who got done precisely for those reasons. She hadn't commented positively on what she had received. She hadn't passed it on to anyone else, but the mere act of participating in that group can get you into legal
now
trouble.
I hadn't realized that, so that makes it even worse.
Even worse. But for sure, I mean, I think it has been a problem. There are some people who write things down that they wouldn't say to people's face on emails as well as on WhatsApps. I think that one needs to be really careful,
very careful.
There's no reason to be disrespectful anyway, is the kind of bottom line. Nevertheless, you can, even when you kind of communicate in a lively fashion about something, it's always been a rule of mine. I think this is what happens when you spend the first 20 years of your life in the civil service. Don't write down something that you don't want to appear in the Daily Mail, because you can be pretty sure that it will appear there if it's interesting enough or not. And yet the role models of senior civil servants seem to have forgotten that since I left as well. And some of the WhatsApps that emerged in the COVID inquiry, from the cabinet secretary,
went missing. There's been a dearth of mobile phone thefts or missing or misappropriations, haven't there? And of course, damn well, not casting any protecting for legal purposes any names or anything like that, but damn well that's not what happened. It's like you absolutely did have inappropriate or stuff on there that shouldn't have been on there, and you're trying to find a way to get out of it. So anyway, the moral of the story is just don't do it.
And if you're in a big WhatsApp group, then even if you lose your mobile phone in the North Sea, there are other people in the group who it will be quite difficult to lose every mobile phone simultaneously. This is one of the things that was interesting quite a long time ago, when I was engaged by Theresa May when she was the Home Secretary to do a review of what the Home Office did or didn't know about child sexual abuse in the late 70s, early 80s, and there were these suggestions that there'd been collusion and cover up, and we were given access to thousands and thousands of Home Office files and folders, and invited to take a look and report on what it was we found. And there were files that were missing. And this created understandable concern that particular documents or files had been destroyed. The counter argument to this is that it has to be an incredible conspiracy to find all the copies of all the right documents in all the files in this incredibly complicated, borderline chaotic way in which the Home Office used to keep absolutely everything. It's almost more difficult to cover something up than to commit the crime. So in the end, we found all sorts of bits and pieces that shouldn't have been said, and clues which led to things which shouldn't have happened, and some things which should have been reported to police at the time and weren't necessarily done so. But the idea that there was some really sophisticated cover-up that had removed this particular group of files down the ages was
not really
unproven, borderline, incredible. And if you can if you try and recreate a record through all the people who've been copied into these WhatsApp groups of one kind or another, again, I think it'd be really difficult to construct a cover-up, which just reinforces your point about if you don't want it to be discovered by anyone and everyone,
then don't say it.
Write it down.
Yeah. Well, that it reminds me a little bit of one of my nieces who went through a period of time was not believing that we'd landed on the moon. And no amount of me talking her through the science and the physics of it, and how actually really rocket science isn't that difficult. It's relatively straightforward once the core sort of maths and all the rest of it. And it was so, because she was absolutely still in denial about it, until I said, even if it was, I said, the amount of cover-up it would have taken. I said, if you think about it, like somebody surely since 1960, whenever it was, and now would have leaked it and made loads of money out of it. And that was the argument that convinced her. It was the argument about human nature, about the fact that there's not a cat in hell's chance that anybody who saw a possibility of making any money out of saying this is all this is all made up, it's not real, that they wouldn't have cashed in. And that was what swung the argument, funnily enough. But I must tell you, Peter, I must have told you the story about Nick Hurd and my dog Mabel.
You have told me this story, but I can't remember the details, and we've not talked about it on the podcast.
Yeah,
so
we haven't told our listeners. Yeah. Well, so listeners, what happened was, so when Nick Hurd was our minister, when the Conservative, well, it was the coalition government at the time, came into power, and he was the minister for charities, and he was a very good minister. He was very accessible in many ways, and so I wasn't the only person who had his mobile phone number. Quite a few people did. So I'm not claiming any special relationship, although I did get on very well with him. I liked him enormously. But anyway, it was my nephew's 18th birthday, and my nephew was living with me at the time. He lived with me for a couple of years because he couldn't live with his parents for various different reasons. So he was going to college near where I was, and it was his 18th birthday. And so I said, come on, you've got to go out to the pub for your 18th birthday and buy me a drink. So it was like, so off we went to the pub. He, of course, didn't drink very much at all. I, the aunt, taking the 18-year-old boy out for his, first drinking session was like quite squiffy, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, my dog, Mabel, my bulldog, she was getting on a bit at the time, and she had a bit of a dodgy tummy. And so she had to keep going out to the garden. And because Kyle were out later than I thought, I messaged my neighbour, who's called Nikki, to say, Nikki, Mabel's... I'm out with Kyle getting pissed, but Mabel's got a bit of a dodgy tummy and I'm worried about coming home to shit all over the floor. So do you mind popping around and letting her out? Anyway, sent the text, went up to the bar, bought another drink. About 5 minutes later, I get a text back, not from my neighbour Nikki, but from Nick Hurd saying, hi, Debs, I'd be happy to help, but unfortunately I'm at the football with my son. Good luck and let me know how Mabel is. And I was so mortified. I just texted a government minister telling him I was pissed and my dog was shitting all over the floor, asking him if he could go and sort it out. Luckily, he thought it was absolutely hilarious, but I've never, ever, ever forgotten that. I was utterly mortified I swear to God, it took me months to recover from the embarrassment of it. So you've got to be so careful about these things.
It's so easily done, isn't it? But well done, Nick Hurd, for declaring that he had received it and coming back to you in a humorous tone. I received something after a family party a couple of months ago from my sister-in-law, which was to do with, thank goodness she'd managed to get herself out of her uncomfortable underwear, which she had only squeezed herself into for the benefit of the relatives. And she'd meant to send that to another of my relatives, but instead has circulated it to everyone who'd come to the party, who had been in touch prior to it about what presents we should be getting the person whose party it was. So I thought at this point it would be a good idea for me to reply quickly and say that this was information I wasn't sure that needed to be shared with me, and she might want to suppress the message. And of course she was mortified, but at least she could delete the message before too many other people had read it.
Seen it, yeah, very funny. I tell you, you've got to be super alert most of the time nowadays, haven't you? To be really careful about what you do and don't say. And I don't mean that in a paranoid sort of way. I mean, if you're enlightened, which is how I chose, because now I'm getting sick to death of people, demonizing and weaponizing the term woke. And so I've decided that it's not that I'm woke, I'm enlightened. And I invite others to be enlightened with me, Peter. This is my new phrase I've decided to adopt. Because I just think, it's like, oh, you're so enlightened, just doesn't sound quite as sneering as, oh, you're so woke, because and people say like, well, I'm not enlightened at all. I don't approve of being enlightened. It doesn't quite sort of, so there you go. That's my new phrase. Message out there. We're all enlightened. We're not woke.
And what about if there is something that you feel quite strongly about, writing it down for the benefit of yourself, but not necessarily sharing it with anyone else? But what happens next? So funnily enough, I'm reading at the moment the 6th volume of Alistair Campbell's diaries, and everyone knew all the time he was doing that succession of really important roles in government, that he was a diarist and he wrote everything down. And I heard someone joking the other day that there's not a day has gone by that he hasn't sought to monetize through the written word one way or another. But his diaries are a fascinating insight into every day of that whole kind of Labour period. And the sixth volume is 20 years ago, so it's 2005, and Tony Blair has said he's going to go, and Gordon Brown is ready to take over. And actually, the kind of tension between them and what Tony Blair wants to achieve before he goes by way of his legacy, and Gordon Brown wants to deny in order that he can be the great achiever, is a rolling theme from about 1995 all the way through these books. And I guess both of them knew that this person who they trusted absolutely was writing all this stuff down at the time. And I guess fair play to him, he held off publishing this stuff until after the event. But I'm really glad he did write it all down, and that we have the chance to see and understand those personalities in such an engaging and searingly honest way. So I wonder if my kind of advice to people, if they do have strong feelings about individuals or issues, is note it down in a diary for yourself rather than putting it on a WhatsApp group, because I don't think diaries are qualify for subject access requests. And then maybe one day.
Yeah, there are all sorts of any documents or written work relating. I can't remember the exact framing of the
COVID inquiry actually did take people's diaries, didn't it?
Yeah, I think they did. Yeah, so I think it does count. I think you can ask for people's, but I'm not entirely sure on that. So I don't want to scare anyone. I mean, I'm used to writing a diary. I'm too much thinking about the future. I barely remember what I did 5 minutes ago, Peter. Never mind, what happened in a day or a week or things. So I always admire people who can keep diaries. It's just something I've never been able to do, probably just as well, to be fair.
For quite a few years now, I have written every night about 7 or 8 sentences as to what I've done in that day. That's all. And it helps me remember if I write it down. But my goodness, Lady Becky has a sign in one of our rooms which says "same old shit," and it's incredible how you can look back 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and on roughly the same day or roughly the same year, you're having roughly the same meetings with roughly the same people about roughly the same issues, and a few football results, and I feel like I enjoy my life most of the time, but when I look back at all this mundane, repetitive, everything changes and nothing changes. It is rather like the TBGBs and Alistair Campbell going round and round and round this loop of these two people that aren't getting on with one another. My kind of succession of budget meetings and management meetings and one-to-ones.
It's so true, isn't it? And the longer you've been around, the more you do get to, I have seen this before. It's like, it's interesting. I suppose the trick is to know when you've got to the point where, oh God, I've seen this before, as opposed to, okay, I've seen this before, I know how to handle it. Do you know what I mean? I think that's when you know that you're tired of your organisation or the life that you're in or what have you. I'm not there yet, I have to say. But, every once in a while I might think, oh God, not this again. Not this.
Yeah, and I didn't particularly feel that at the end of PCC. I loved it right up until the end, and I didn't feel that I was in a sort of treadmill. And when you look back,
you realise. So what's next,
there was a rhythm
Peter?
to it.
Yeah, the new things. So what new things are coming your way?
Yeah, so actually, they've announced publicly today, though I've been doing it for a little while, that I've been engaged by a global group of schools called Nord Anglia Education to be their independent safeguarding advisor. So this is it's a part-time role, and it's to help the advisory boards which govern Nord Anglia Education to have really big challenge and support conversations about the quality of safeguarding and cultural health across the group, which is not a straightforward thing when you are growing fast, already have upward of 80 schools in 30 plus countries around the world. So it's a fascinating intellectual challenge. It's interesting for me because I've been very much kind of UK focused in what I've been doing for the last 11 or so years. So there are plenty of people in the Nord Anglia group who seem to be never off aeroplanes or engaging with one another, and they find that the drudgery of going from place to place. But for me, that has a bit of kind of excitement and an interest to it. And it gives me the chance to meet lots of young people and teachers and parents, just have kind of conversations about what good safeguarding looks like and feels like to them. So I've just begun doing that, and as I say, it's sort of publicly announced
well
today. So that's interesting, and one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And then Friday night is the launch dinner for Somerset Cricket Club's 150th anniversary year. So I'm off down to Taunton for that. We've got captains from the history of the club coming back, and lots of members and supporters coming along. And it's going to be the start of, we hope, a fantastic and memorable season with lots of events to celebrate
and a winning season. Let's hope for you.
Hopefully a winning season, yes.
Because you set yourselves up well last season, didn't you? Can I just ask a question about the job of the group, Peter? Because it just occurred to me. So if it's safeguarding 80 schools in 30 different countries, presumably there can't be a core standard that's applied across, because I'm guessing there must be different legislation, different cultural practices. It must be quite a challenge. To, because I don't even know how good our legislation is. I always get the sense ours is quite good, although it could always be better compared to other countries. But
yes, this is absolutely at the nub, really, of the challenge. One of the things that I really like about the group, and some of the people I know there from my time at education who work there now, is that they are really hot on distributed leadership and giving responsibility and opportunity for leaders to shape their organizations for the culture and context they operate in. And great teaching and learning, I think, really benefits from that. But you can't leave the fundamentals of the safety and well-being of children to chance. There are some fundamental obligations and requirements that need to be met, and they are set out legally differently, not only in every country, but in the different provinces of China. And so on and so on. So I think, one of the big questions and debates I'm really starting to get into is, how does one assure oneself that legal obligations and requirements are adhered to, but you don't get lost in the detail of regulatory compliance? Because, we know that if the people in and around the schools only think of child protection as a kind of burden or yet another kind of responsibility or box to be ticked, you miss the big promise which the group has, which that children who are educated here will be happy, healthy, better than anywhere else. So that is a conundrum right at the heart of what I'll be exploring with them, I think. But early days.
Interesting. So you'll have to keep us posted, Peter, where you can. I expect some of it will be slightly confidential, I'm guessing, but just the general principle, because of course we have to, like in our sector, in the charity sector, we constantly, NGOs, obviously international organizations, have to do this anyway. They've got to navigate all the complexities of different socio-economic, political, countries' pressures and things. But even within the UK, we have to navigate the challenges of different regions. We definitely have to navigate the challenges of different countries. You just think about with Charity Commission for England and Wales, is only England and Wales. And then you've got Oscar, which is Scotland. And then you've got, what's the Northern Irish one called? I do know it. Of course I do. It's gone right out of my head. Anyway, my age. But yeah, it is quite challenging navigating those sorts of different things.
And some of our colleagues have federated structures as well, don't they? So what's the responsibility of Mind Central versus local minds, Age UK versus etc., and that's fascinating in kind of governance and cultural terms.
Yeah, scouts, guides. Lots of, other kind. Yeah, we'll have quite a few federated charities, don't we? To listeners who aren't sure what a federated charity is, basically it's where there's kind of like one central charity, which is like, and all the other charities are members of it effectively. So, for example, there's Mind UK, which is the central body, and then each individual Mind is its own independent charity with its own board of trustees, its own chief exec, its own governing documents, etc. And it's quite difficult to navigate the complexities of all of that, although for the most part I think they tend to do it pretty well. You always get one group of charities who aren't happy for whatever particular reason, but it's not easy to do.
That's right. And what do you stand for? What in cultural terms, what do you stand for? So if you want to make a big deal of LGBTQ plus rights as a charity, but you have some local volunteers who don't want to wear pride lanyards, we've seen this emerge, time and again. And how do you create, respectful relationships? What do you say is non-negotiable, and what do you say is, for discussion and interpretation?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I'm quite grateful DSE isn't a membership organisation. I mean, we're deliberately not one because we don't feel the need to be a membership organisation. And also we don't want to represent charities. We want to support them. We want to stand up for them. We also want to be able to tell them off. And also we recognise that, and you see this a lot, recently, for example, where, there's a newly formed charity that is a charity that isn't something that people feel are particularly aligned with the values of the membership organisation they've applied to join, but they have to let them join because the justification is we just don't like your values, and yet you can't. That's not what you have to do in charity law. So there's been, some of our membership colleagues have had some real challenges with I don't want to name because I don't particularly want to pile on for anybody at all, but charities with whom you think I don't like that charity, I don't approve that, I don't approve what it's trying to do, being a member, and actually get that anyway. Just the obvious ones when you think about Campaign for Rural England versus the RSPCA, for example, or animal welfare charities, the battles they have, because of course they have completely different views of what should be done. I was at Leather Sellers on Thursday. Was it Thursday or Wednesday last week? I can't remember, giving a keynote. Oh no, I was on a panel, sorry, at Leather Sellers. And what was amazing about Leather Sellers, Peter, which of course is itself a charity, it's one of the livery companies, it has leather wallpaper. It's incredible. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The most high quality, animal skin wallpaper. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But what was really funny is that one of the people attending, who were the charity, that one of the charities that Leather Sellers supports, was vegan. And so this was somewhat of a challenge being brought into this environment. Apparently she was heard to say, "I'm having to consort with the enemy for the sake of funding for the charity." It was very, very funny. I don't think it was a vegan charity. I think it was a vegan, and of course there are quite a few vegans in our sector, but it did make me smile. She had to endure the leather wallpaper.
Yeah, it takes us right back to the conversation we were having about progressive activists and building wide coalitions, and where do you compromise your principles, and where do you
exactly
take a stand.
Yeah, I'm sure some of her vegan mates would have been livid that she, but on the other hand, she's doing it for the sake of the charity that she serves, which wasn't a vegan charity, I don't think, anyway. So, the dilemmas with which we find ourselves in the charitable sector, anything from do we take money from the Russian oligarch or the weapons manufacturer, all the way down to I'm a vegan, should I be going to a Leather Sellers event? I shouldn't laugh because I sound like I'm mocking, and I'm really not mocking. These could be really serious dilemmas for folk in our sector are really tough to do. You don't get quite the same issues in the private sector, or even necessarily in the public sector, where you're able to let go of all that stuff very often just to get the job done. But in our sector, people really judge you if you're seen in any way, shape or form to be being a hypocrite or like betraying the values of, whatever it is you're supporting.
Yeah. I'm sure my principles are far too elastic.
Yeah.
For some.
I think it depends on what the principles are, aren't they? I mean, I've always said if you're not prepared to pay for it, it's not a principle. It's it's like if it's a proper principle that you believe in. I always say principles have prices.
Yes.
And if you're not prepared to pay the price, it's not a principle. It's a bit like years ago when I won't go into the details of it, but DSC had a big grant from the government. And what they wanted to and it was a grant to do a piece of work, and then they wanted to take the piece of work back off us, turn it into a tender to contract out. And they said to us, you can apply for this, and you're likely to win this tender. Anyway, we put our foot down and said, no, we're not going to do that. You gave us a grant, and it's a grant. So the IP belongs to us. You're not having that to give to somebody else to take. We've done all the work, and if you don't want to fund us, that's fair enough, but we're not giving you the intellectual property. But it was a big argument at the time with my trustees who were like, that's madness because we're going to lose the money, and if they said we're going to get it anyway. But we did stand on principle. And in the end, it cost us effectively about £3 million over about 5 to 8 years. But I don't particularly regret it because it was a very strong principle of this is a grant, this is our stuff, and also the terms and conditions that they had. It was when Labour, very disappointing, New Labour, suddenly went all right wing and started introducing payment by results and all that kind of stuff, which is like it's almost impossible in our sector to do payment by results because what are you measuring and over what period of time? Think about the NSPCC for God's sake. Lots of the impact you have is only manifested years later.
There's a regular, very interesting, big discussion between government and Childline about what government is paying for any money it puts into that service. And, understandably, from the government point of view, they want to see productive impact and outcome from their money, but it's incorrect to say therefore a productive contact with Childline is 4.7 minutes, or whatever it might be, because but at the same time they are right to challenge the service that if you're just going round and round in the same circle with a young person for 45 minutes, stopping them feeling lonely but not moving the conversation on to anywhere, that's not right either. Anyway, I think we're out of time, and there's much more we could explore there in future episodes. But for now, I think
Peter,
we need
you and I are now famous for never remembering what it was we said we were going to pick up in the next podcast. We always get to next week and say, "Now, what was it we said last week that we were going to talk about this week?" And then we never remember.
Well, that's you see, we need a research team, and
we do,
and a whole lot of.
If anybody wants to fund one for us, or anyone wants to volunteer to be Peter and Debra's researchers,
we are doing this with just a little bit of help, so we do rely on likes, subscribes, downloads to feed our egos.
Yes, no keep money us going. Yeah, and we should actually just shout out to the wonderful José Blázquez, who is who works for us at DSC and who manages and edits and produces his podcast for us. Sorry, out of the at the end of the working day, out of I'd like to say love for our work, but might be fear of me. I don't know, but whatever it is, we're very grateful.
We are very good.
Okay, Twinnies.
All right,
see you next
thanks
week.
a lot. Yeah,
bye
see you.
all.
Bye.
Bye.